Good afternoon. We're back. We are, of course, in the middle. Well, it's hard to say in the middle of Ezekiel when we're only getting into chapter 4, and there's what 48 chapters in Ezekiel. So, yeah. Well, we're in the midst of Ezekiel. There we go. We've been working through our way through the uh, call narrative of Ezekiel, where he's described the vision that he's had and the charge that he has been given by God. And we are now moving from that call sequence into the the beginnings of his prophetic work. And so we'll be seeing a bunch of that today in chapter 4, and plus a few other things. Um, so hang on, we're gonna hit the road running, and we're gonna pick up a bit with where we left off last week because we didn't quite finish Ezekiel chapter 3. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to pick up at chapter 3, verse 22. And the hand of the Lord was upon me there, and he said to me, Arise, go out into the valley, and there I will speak with you. So I arose and went out into the valley, and behold, the glory of the Lord stood there, like the glory that I had seen by the Kabar canal. And I fell on my face. But the Spirit entered into me and set me on my feet, and he spoke with me and said to me, Go, shut yourself within your house. And you, O son of man, behold, cords will be placed upon you, and you shall be bound with them, so that you cannot go out among the people. And I will make your tongue cling to the roof of your mouth, so that you shall be mute, and unable to reprove them, for they are a rebellious house. But when I speak with you, I will open your mouth, and you shall say to them, Thus says the Lord God. He who will hear, let him hear, and he who will refuse to hear, let him refuse, for they are a rebellious house. This pretty much wraps up the call of Ezekiel. We'll be getting into his first prophecy in the next chapter. But anyhow, we're at the tail end of this, where he sees one final vision of God. He sees the glory of God, as he describes it as, it was just like when I was at the Kabar Canal. And we are and he's getting some last bits of instruction. And these last bits of instruction are going to be doing things such as tying things up, literally. His tongue is going to be silenced, or as it says, made to cling to the roof of his mouth, and he's going to have cords placed upon him. Now, given the nature of this text, we could go either way. Is he actually going to be bound with ropes, or is this a metaphorical speaking? And the reason I say we could go either way is because Ezekiel is one of those prophets where his prophecies sometimes take a physical form. They have an action to them. And we're going to see that in chapter 4, where he does these prophetic actions. So it is entirely possible, and he could be bound. Mostly, I want to say that this, even if it is physical, it has a greater meaning, and that meaning is given to some extent in this passage, particularly with the talk about the binding of the tongue, where he's going to be mute except when the Spirit uses him to speak and says, Thus says the Lord. And so again, we are really getting hammered away that it is God who is doing these things. Ezekiel is, I don't want to call him a puppet because it's just not really the right word, but he is the means by which God is delivering this message. And we're hammering home in this call sequence the idea that it is God doing these things, that it's not Ezekiel, it's not his plans, it's not his desires. This is God's work from beginning to end. And so with this final bit, we're just really reinforcing that. And then God gives him a charge at the end with a, okay, and whoever hears, let him hear, and whoever refuses, let him refuse. That is very much similar to the idea that we would hear in Jesus's ministry when he would describe the nature of the rain of heaven going out as the sower just throwing seed out there. And if you tuned in for our Matthew Bible study when we covered the parable of the sower, and it was very much a very indiscriminate sowing, which made no sense because anybody who has any lick of farming sense knows that to maximize your yield, you actually take careful steps to plant your seeds in nice, neat rows and carefully spaced. Because if you just throw your seed out there, chances are you're going to waste some. You're going to put some in the ground that's not good. You're going to get some onto the paths. You're going to put seed that's too close together. And all these things that anybody with a lick of sense in agriculture would just kind of pull their hair out and scream. And now in Ezekiel, or prior, how will we look at that? Because really Ezekiel's before Matthew, but as a group we studied Matthew before Ezekiel. But looking at Ezekiel, we see the very same idea. You're just going to throw it out there, and where it lands is where it lands. And we'll go with it. So
Some of the open that it stays, so you know that it won't.
That could be one way to look at it, and that God just knows the reality of the situation, and he's going to toss it out there for everybody. Because, well, that's the generous kind of guy he is. God, he is. And so, yeah. And really, if there's one thing that we should always remark about God with his good news is that he's incredibly generous with it. He throws it out to everybody, even if they are going to reject him. And so if we should learn anything from this, is we should be just as generous ourselves in tossing the gospel out there. I know that some of my brothers will talk about, well, it really pays to be smart about these things and carefully plan and have a target audience and all that kind of stuff. When really, if we want to take the biblical example, we just throw it out there. Where it lands is where it lands. I'm not saying we have to do things big and expensive, just throw it out there. All right, moving onwards, because, we're actually going to try and move through Ezekiel. Chapter 4. Oh, man. I should have looked at this before I decided to try and read this. Yeah. It was, oh, wow. That is some tiny print in my notes.
My tries don't work.
Yeah. I would definitely need my magnifying glass to be able to see that. And yeah, this is what I get for printing my notes out just before class is supposed to start. I don't actually get a chance to look at some of the things, and wow, tiny print. You think the small print on your legal contracts is small. This might give it a competition. All right, enough with that. Ezekiel chapter 4, 1 through 17. I'm probably going to break this up into a bit of chunks here, so I'm not going to read it all at once. So let's go with 1 through 3 first. And you, son of man, take a brick and lay it before you, and engrave on it a city, even Jerusalem. And put siege works against it, and build a siege wall against it, and cast up a mound against it, set camps also against it, and plant battering rams against it all around. And you, take an iron griddle, and place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and set your face toward it, and let it be in a state of siege, and press the siege against it. This is a sign for the house of Israel. Okay, and so essentially what God is telling Ezekiel to do is build a diorama. The model railroader in me is going, hey, this is an awesome prophecy. Building those things, that's a lot of fun. This is a prophecy, and it has some specific meanings. So he's to build this diorama of a city in siege. Now, I think it's funny that he's supposed to take a brick and then just write the name of the city on it. And it could be whatever city, including Jerusalem, it's such an odd way of putting things, but given that it is a sign for the house of Israel, we're going to just go ahead and say it's for Jerusalem. Which would be very fitting, to be honest, because of what has happened and happening to Jerusalem, and that it fell under siege prior to the exile, and it falls under siege again and is destroyed. So for him to build this diorama and put all these siege engines and everything around it, and it is very much a very pointed thing to what is happening to Jerusalem. But it is going to have, I think, some greater meaning, particularly as this chapter builds. And we start to see it in this passage. Because we get all these things. We've got the siege engines, the camps, the battering rams, and then an iron griddle. What, does God want to have a cookout? No. Entirely likely. This is very much symbolic of God cutting himself off from his people, or cutting his people off from him, however you want to put it. But basically, he is stating, I'm not going to rescue you. The city is going to fall. And the reason I'm going to say this is because, well, one, the iron griddle would be, of course, a kind of a picture of an impenetrable wall. As, let's face it, by the military technology of that day, if you were to put a layer of iron around your wall, the only thing that was going to destroy it would be rust. So if you kept it well oiled and such, nobody was going to do anything to it. And it's not like they had acetylene cutting torches. It's not like they had big explosive bombs, which has rendered iron armor a pointless endeavor. It's not like they had armor-piercing projectiles. I'm sure they could probably get a scorpion or what, or I was just reading stuff with ancient weaponry in it, and now I can't think of it. But maybe those could do something, but really it was an unbeatable armor for a time. And so with that being placed between Ezekiel and the city, and the fact that he is supposed to be staring at it in anger, that's what the phrase "set your face toward it" is meaning here. He's supposed to be looking at it angrily, and he's supposed to be mad, and showing wrath against it. So to have that impenetrable wall between him and the city and all the folks that are laying siege to it is very much pointing towards the fact God's ticked. He's cutting them off. He is now sending them into punishment. And this whole diorama scene is meant to be a sign towards the house of Israel, the remnant, those who are listening, and that's telling them this is what's happening. the time of punishment is at hand, and because of this iniquities of the people. And all of this is going to be playing out throughout chapter 4. So this is just kind of the opening salvo, so to speak. He builds this nice diorama, and then he sets up the wall, and then he looks mad at it. But he's also going to be doing some other things. And this is a full-on role-playing exercise. And that's basically what God's asking Ezekiel to do, is to role-play. He's to act out what is going to be happening to the house of Israel and to the people. And so we have the beginnings with the whole siege, which is something that folks can relate to because, well, they just went through a siege. And Jerusalem is about to go under another siege in which it's going to fall and be destroyed. And the people are going to be have already been placed into an unclean land. And this is informing them exactly what is going on, essentially. And he's going to build upon what he is doing here. So let's move on. We're going to pick up a little bit more of what this siege means. Okay, after he builds it, puts out the iron griddle and sets his face towards it, and he looks angry at it. He's supposed to lie on his left side. Picking up verse 4. Then lie on your left side and place the ESV translates this as punishment, but I'm going to just go with iniquity. Iniquity of the house, and I'll explain why here in a little while. And place the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. For the number of days that you lie on it, you shall bear their iniquity. For I assign to you a number of days, 390 days, equal to the number of years of their iniquity. So long shall you bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. And when you have completed these, you shall lie down a second time, but on your right side, and bear the iniquity of the house of Judah. 40 days I assign to you, a day for each year. And you shall set your face toward the siege of Jerusalem, with your arm bared, and you shall prophesy against the city. And behold, I will place cords upon you, so that you cannot turn from one side to the other, till you have completed the days of your siege. So, Ezekiel is to lay down now for a certain number of days with bearing the iniquity of the people. And we're given a certain number of days, 390 for the house of Israel, 40 for the house of Judah. Given the context of this, we should understand this as referring to northern kingdom, southern kingdom. For those of you who are a little unfamiliar with those terms, after the reign of David and Solomon, the nation of Israel was divided into two kingdoms. Israel was what was referred to as the northern kingdom, which would have involved pretty much all the tribes but Judah, and so all of their land. And then the southern kingdom, which was primarily Judah. I'd have to go back and look at the land maps to remember exactly how the tribe breakdown was, but those are pretty much, it was Judah and everybody else. Is pretty close to it, with Levi scattered amongst them, of course, because Levi has no land. Anyhow, so when he's talking house of Israel, house of Judah, in this case, he is referring to northern kingdom and southern kingdom. And I'm going to stress in this case because usually, and this is a fair number of times in Ezekiel, when he uses Israel and Judah together, he's using them synonymously. Did I say that right? Yeah. That they're pretty much meaning the same thing. and he's referring pretty much to the remnant. Generally speaking, in Ezekiel, if he wants to refer to the northern kingdom, he usually uses one of the other names for the northern kingdom, like Edom, which was one of the capital cities and such. And particularly when it's done in conjunction with Judah. And there is a reason for this. We start to see the theological understanding of the house of Israel really start to make an appearance in Ezekiel. It's not the only place that it does in the Old Testament, but so we are going to see that general differentiation. Boy, I'm tongue-tied today. Occurring in Ezekiel. And so this is an unusual occurrence where we have House of Israel, House of Judah actually referring to Northern Kingdom, Southern Kingdom. Usually when he refers to the Northern Kingdom, he picks a different name than Israel. So this is an unusual circumstance, but there's a reason why I think he picked that, and it has a lot to do with these numbers. And looking at these numbers, they do provide a fair bit of difficulty in understanding, because 390 doesn't match up with anything that we have in historical records. It just doesn't. I'm sure it's bigger than Judah's number, which would be fitting in that, well, the northern kingdom was in exile for longer than Judah. It fell much sooner. But by all the dating that we can do, we can't really figure out how in the world, where does 390 years come from? With the 40 days, it's close-ish to the amount of time that there was going to be for exile of Judah. Close, not exact. So these numbers are just, they can be a little baffling if you're trying to take them literally. But if we start taking our clues from the fact that he refers to Israel and Judah, and this is something of a bit unusual move for him to use them to refer to northern and southern kingdom, we can start to get an idea of what's going on, particularly with the tie-in of iniquity. So we've got 390 days for the house of Israel, 40 days for the house of Judah, and they're to be done consecutively. They're not to be fulfilled simultaneously. So he will do 390 and then he'll do 40 for a total of 430 days. Now we are already given that the 40 days is in reference to years. So 430 years. Some folks have noted, of course, with the 40 years, there's already an obvious parallel. And maybe you get it. It does require a bit of familiarity with the Old Testament. 40 years. What would 40 years refer to in the history of Israel? The exile, the time in the wilderness, when they are wandering from Egypt into the Promised Land. So maybe there's a link there. And I want to say yes, there is. Simply because something else is going to show up if we start going in that direction. And 40 days, 40 years, that would be a theologically significant number for the people of Judah, for the people of Israel, people familiar with the Old Testament. Because you've got the 40 years of wandering through the wilderness, 40 days of the flood, that kind of thing. And so, okay, we have this is kind of a tenuous link now, but there's a stronger link. If we add them together, because they're done consecutively, and so this is a legitimate, understanding here, 390 plus 40 is how many days? 430 days. These days are meant to correspond to years. How long was Israel, the Hebrew people, in Egypt? 430 years. 390 plus 40, 430 years. This should be significant to us. Deuteronomy 28:68. Moses prophesies that if Israel is to be disobedient, they will be returned to Egypt. They will be sent back into bondage. So if we begin to look at this typologically, we have 430 days, 430 years. We have a corresponding 430 with their time in Egypt. And being sent into Egypt is being linked with disobedience. And of course, God has set himself against them because of their disobedience. He has cast them out of the land because of their disobedience. We're bringing in some meaning here with just these numbers. 430 years, 400 and be returned to Egypt. He's calling on them to remember their bondage in Egypt. And this is significant because Egypt is already becoming synonymous with sin and the punishment for sin. Because we see this idea also appearing in Hosea. I mean, there's several verses with the idea of being sent into Egypt for sin. We see it in Hosea 8:13, 9:3-6, 9:6, and the most famous one of all, Hosea 11:1. The reason I say that's the most famous of all, because, well, that's the one that gets quoted in Matthew when it's describing Jesus being called out of Egypt. So what we have here is a typical move for this. I'm going to say this kind of literature. It's a loose category, and then I'm throwing it in with Revelation, even though they're not exactly the same. But this typological move of using numbers to point to a greater significance than just the numbers. And this significance is, okay, this time of me being set against you is the punishment for the iniquity of the people. And we know this because, well, he's already Ezekiel's already bearing the iniquity of the people in a symbolic form. I hate the word symbolic because it's not quite right. And he's not really acting in the priestly fashion because he can't. He's not a priest. Even though Ezekiel is of the house of Levi, he would not have been ordained as a priest because he left Jerusalem before he would be of age to be a priest in the temple. So we can't say that he is performing the priestly function, but I do think we can say he is pointing towards the priestly function. And with the bearing of iniquity, the being sent back into Egypt, and all of this coming together, the wrath of God bearing down upon his chosen people, and with what Moses is saying about the return to Egypt, and what Hosea is going to be saying about the return to Egypt, and the very clear link with Hosea to Jesus, we are getting a prophecy that is, well, yes, describing the current situation, but is also pointing us forward. And that who is ultimately going to bear the iniquity of the people, who is ultimately going to be facing the wrath of God, and who is going to be the one who is called out of Egypt. It's Jesus. Who knows? We're going to find Jesus in Ezekiel, in the actions that he's doing, and the things that is happening. We're getting an idea. It's pointing us towards what is Jesus going to do. And he is going to bear the iniquity of his people. He's going to bear the guilt. He is going to bear the condition of iniquity, even though he was not in himself sinful. But he will bear it all. And he's going to do it for his people, the entirety of his people. And so we're seeing this playing out in Ezekiel's little action prophecy as he's playing out the siege. And this is a connection that we cannot ignore. It's one they may not have gotten at the time, simply because when Hosea was prophesying around this time too, so it would be one that would be caught later. But definitely this is very much a pointing towards what is going to be happening in Jesus. And we can't ignore it. The idea of the time of being punished in Egypt when they actually weren't ever sent to Egypt. That's another key point. We have the clear connection with Egypt in the 430 years, and Moses prophesying that they would be sent back into Egypt. And, well, the people were never sent into Egypt. I mean, they were thrown into exile. They were thrown into an unclean land, but they were never sent actually into Egypt. Egypt is a type for sin. It is meant to illustrate sin. And with them never going into Egypt, but Jesus and actually going into Egypt and then being called out of Egypt, we can't say anything but that this is pointing us towards what is going to happen with him bearing the iniquity of his people, with him being driven into the realm of sin, so to speak, that he would willingly go there. And then he would return out of it, and he, in doing so, would deliver his people. And we're seeing that play out here in the siege. God has set himself against the people, but there's one who will bear the iniquity. All right, so moving onwards. Wow, I'm starting to run out of time. Just with the rest of... all right, well, I'm going to get to the rest of the passage. And then take wheat. This is starting in verse 9. And you take wheat, barley, beans, and lentils, millet, emmer, and put them into a single vessel, and make your bread from them. And during the number of days that you lie on your side, 390 you shall eat it. And your food that you shall eat be by weight 20 shekels a day. From day to day you shall eat it. And your water shall drink by measure the 6th part of a hin. From day to day you shall drink it. And you shall eat it as a barley cake, baking it in their sight on human dung. Lovely. And the Lord said, thus shall all the people of Israel eat their bread unclean among the nations where I will drive them. Then I said, O Lord God, behold, I have never defiled myself. From my youth up till now I have never eaten what died itself, or was torn from beasts, nor was tainted meat from come into my mouth. Then he said to me, see, as assigned to you cow's dung, I assign to you cow's dung instead of human dung, on which you may prepare your bread. Moreover, he said to me, Son of man, behold, I will break the supply of bread in Jerusalem. They shall eat bread by weight and with anxiety, and they shall drink water by measure and in dismay. I will do this, that they may lack bread and water, and look at one another in dismay, and rot away because of their iniquity. Okay.
He's telling them they're going to have a famine.
What?
He's telling them they're going to have a famine.
Largely, he's describing what happens in a siege. The idea of just throwing everything together, I mean, that's really much saying, you don't got jack. And so you're trying to make it out of whatever you can. And to be honest, that mix that he describes really is not pleasant. That just yuck to begin with, and then the idea of cooking it over poop. Right? You know, manure fires smell bad enough. I can't imagine cooking over human dung. I mean, yuck. Oh, which, by the way, human dung is never really mentioned as being unclean or forbidden, but So no, God was not asking him to do something that was forbidden, but it's just nasty, the thought of it. But God relents. He goes, okay, you can do cow dung. I don't know how much relenting that is, because that stuff stinks. I know. I was in the Boy Scouts. We burned it. It smells. I mean the cow dung. um, I will neither confirm nor deny anything else. All right. So, but anyhow, just really quickly with it, this is really much the idea of, yeah, you're there. Things are going to be scarce. In siege, that's what happens. Food gets scarce because, well, the purpose of the siege is to cut you off from your food and make it so that you have no reinforcements, all that kind of stuff, and pretty much get it to the point where you're too weak to fight. So, siege, yeah, that's it. And it's going to be nasty, and poor Ezekiel's got to eat it. Um, for more than a year, 430 days. And man, this is nasty stuff. Um, it has been noted that the amount that he's given to eat would not be sufficient for a person to survive a year, um, which has led a few folks to say that uh, this this was not a full-time prophecy. That even though he was doing this for 430 days, it was for a certain set amount of time every day. And so I kind of give him the idea of feasibility, particularly because unlike with Elijah, it's Elijah or Elisha, I could never keep these two guys straight. One of these days I'm going to manage it, but that's probably going to be the day Jesus comes back with the rate I've been going, where he is supernaturally provided with food. This does not seem to be the case here, so I would lean towards the more natural understanding of he does this for a certain amount of time each day, and that this is not his only sustenance. What it matters in the great scheme of things, not a whole bunch. So, but all right. More importantly, now I did promise that I would get to this whole thing of why I chose iniquity over punishment for the translation. And it has a lot to do with the Hebrew word that is being translated here. I hope I get this right. Avon, I think is how it's pronounced. Like I said, I've never been really good at translating, speaking these words. Let's see if I can do a screen share right quick so you guys can see it. Where did screen share go? Ah, there we are. There's. Let's see if this works. Yeah, there we go. All right, you see the got it highlighted-ish. There we go. It highlighted. That particular word, Aeon, Avon, however you want to pronounce it, is an incredibly loaded term, as you can see from my notes here, and that it means a lot more than just sin. And oh, there we go. I'm back. It means a lot of stuff. In fact, Horace Humble really says it well. This one word covers the entirety of our understanding of sin, theologically speaking, and that it is used to describe a single sinful action. Say, the description of David going out and committing adultery with Bathsheba. That would fit. The sinful condition, our original sin, the fact that we are sinful by nature, has been used to describe that. It is also used to describe the guilt resulting from sins, and the fact that we're guilty. It also has been used to describe the divine punishment as a result of sin, or the act of, and it even has referred to the one who bears sin. So this particular word, which is translated iniquity, has also been translated punishment in all sorts of different ways. I think if we keep it a punishment, we're narrowing it down too far. But if we leave it at iniquity, we can cover the entire gamut of the meaning, which is not to say that everything is meant, but that it is more than simple punishment, because we have Ezekiel bearing the iniquity of the people. We have God actually carrying out his righteous judgment against iniquity. We have the people being guilty of iniquity, and all of these things kind of thrown in together. And so I think it bears fruit for us to understand this in its broader sense, rather than just divine punishment. And yeah, we're talking real wrath of God stuff here, but at the same time, we're talking, why is God wrathful? We're talking of our guilt. We're talking of our own individual iniquities. We are talking in terms of the one who will bear our iniquity. And given the typological references to what Jesus does as the Savior of all people, there's greater justice, I think, in using the translation of iniquity than punishment, which the ESV does. So, like I promised, I tell you why I chose iniquity, and that's why, in a nutshell. The word aeon means a lot more than punishment, and we don't do ourselves a good service by just saying punishment. Instead, we do ourselves a greater service by seeing our own sins in that word, and seeing our iniquities piled upon Jesus as he buries them, and we are delivered out of our own personal Egypt of our own sins. And with that, I am way over time, so we're going to stop here. If you got questions, don't hesitate to ask them. Don't hesitate to message me, leave a comment, whatever. And if you like what you're hearing, please like, subscribe, let other people know, and get the word out that we're getting together and going through the Bible as in-depth as we can in these short periods of time. And with that, have a good week, and we'll see you next week.